All right, welcome. Today we are jumping into 3 strategic models that are absolute must-knows for any management accountant. Think of these as the high-level toolkit executives use to make those really big decisions. If you can master these, you're not just getting ready for an exam, you're getting ready for the boardroom. Okay, let's get into it.
So, let's start with a very real question. Picture this. You're in a big meeting, and you need to argue for moving millions of dollars from one part of the company to another. How do you justify it? You can't just go in with a gut feeling, right? Nope. You need a solid analytical framework to make your case. And that is exactly where these models come in.
And look, these aren't just some abstract theories you read about in a textbook. In the real world, and especially for your CMA exam, these models are practical blueprints. They're the techniques you'll actually use to figure out where your company has an edge, and maybe even more importantly, where to allocate the money to really press that advantage.
So in our toolkit today, we're focusing on the 3 heavy hitters you've absolutely got to know. We're going to look at the BCG matrix for managing your company's portfolio, then Porter's generic strategies for figuring out how to compete, and finally, the product lifecycle for understanding how things change over time. And the best part? We'll see how they all connect. Let's do it.
Okay, first up, the Boston Consulting Group Matrix, or as everyone calls it, the BCG Matrix. So what's it for? Well, its main job is to help a big company manage its whole collection of different businesses or products and decide, quite simply, where to put the cash for the best results.
It's actually pretty simple to look at. It's just a 2x2 grid. So running up and down, you've got market growth rate. That's how fast the entire industry is growing. And then going side to side is relative market share, which is just a fancy way of asking, how big are we compared to our number 1 competitor? Every single business unit you've got will fall into one of these 4 boxes.
In the top left, we have the stars. Now, these are your exciting, high-potential businesses. They're in fast-growing markets, and you're already a leader. That's fantastic. But they are incredibly cash-hungry. They just burn through money to fuel that growth and fight off all the competitors. So the strategy here is simple. You've got to feed the star. Invest, invest, invest.
Next up, everybody's favorite, the cash cows. These are your established leaders, but they're in mature, slow-growth markets. Think of a classic product everyone knows and just keeps buying. The best part is they don't need huge investments anymore, so they just generate a ton of steady, reliable cash. And this is crucial. That cash is what funds pretty much everything else in the company.
Now, things get a little tricky with the question marks. You'll sometimes hear them called problem children. They're in those exciting high-growth markets, but you have a really low market share. They're a total gamble. So what do? Do you pour a ton of money from your cash cows into them, hoping you can turn one into a star? Or do you just cut your losses? This is one of the hardest calls a company has to make.
And finally, that brings us to the dogs. Low market share in a low-growth market. I mean, these businesses just aren't going anywhere, and they might even be losing money, just draining your resources. The standard advice is to divest, sell them, or just liquidate them to free up that capital for something better. And look, it's a simple model, but for that big picture view, it is incredibly powerful.
Okay, exam tip. This is huge, so I really want you to lock this in. This is a classic question. When the exam asks where the money comes from to fund a new project, or to feed a star, or to take a bet on a question mark, the answer is almost always the cash cows. They are the financial engine for the whole portfolio. Remember that.
Okay, great. So the BCG matrix gives us a map of where we should invest. But once we decide to back one of our stars, the next question is, how? How do we actually compete and win in that market? Well, that's where the incredible work of Michael Porter comes in. His strategies are basically the playbook for turning that market position into real, sustainable profits. Now, Porter's big idea was that to win, you have to make a clear choice. If you try to be everything to everybody, you'll get what he called stuck in the middle, and you'll end up losing. So he laid out these strategies based on 2 key decisions: your competitive scope. Are you targeting a broad market or a narrow little niche? And your competitive advantage. Are you going to win by being the lowest cost provider or by being unique and different?
Now this, right here, is where strategy connects directly to your job as a CMA. If your company chooses cost leadership like Walmart, your entire focus on ruthless efficiency. You're hunting down every penny you can save in the supply chain, in operations, everywhere. But if the strategy is differentiation, like Apple, your budget priorities completely flip. Your focus is now on justifying big spends for R&D and marketing and figuring out how to price a unique product to capture its value. Your financial analysis has to champion whatever strategy is chosen.
So Porter tells us how to compete.
But that strategy might need to change over time because markets and products evolve. And that brings us to our third essential model, the product lifecycle. This one is so critical because it helps us forecast how a product's sales, profits, and cash flows are going to change over its entire life.
And you've probably seen this classic bell-shaped curve before. It really does tell the story. Pretty much every product, from its launch to its decline, tends to follow this kind of path. As a management accountant, your financial strategy, your pricing, your marketing budget, your cost controls, it can't be static. It has to adapt to each of these stages.
So let's just walk through it real quick. In the introduction stage, sales are low, costs are high, and you're usually losing money as you spend on marketing. Then, in the growth stage, sales just take off. The focus here is on grabbing as much market share as you can. Then comes maturity, where sales peak and the game shifts to being efficient and maximizing your profit. And finally, in the decline stage, sales fall and you have to get really serious about cutting costs or planning your exit.
And here is another key exam tip for you. While sales are growing fastest in the growth stage, peak profitability usually happens in the maturity stage. So why is that? It's because those big, heavy R&D and marketing costs are mostly behind you, and you've achieved economies of scale. Now wait a minute, a mature product with high market share that's generating a ton of cash. Does that sound familiar? It should. It's basically a cash cow from our first model. You see? It all connects.
So, we've looked at these three powerful models one by one, but their real strength, what makes them so useful in the real world, is how you use them together. You can think of them as a strategic dashboard, giving you a complete picture of your business.
This table here is your ultimate study guide. You use the BCG matrix to answer, where should we invest our money? You use Porter's strategies to answer, okay, but how are we going to win? And you use the product lifecycle to answer, how are our cash flows going to change over time? Together, they give you this really robust, complete framework for strategic planning.
And let me be really clear about this. These models aren't just for the strategy people in the corner office. They are the absolute foundation of every long-term financial plan, every budget, and every forecast you will ever build in your career as a CMA. Understanding them is completely non-negotiable.
I'll leave you with one final thought. These frameworks are classics, right? They were developed decades ago. So in today's world of digital products, fast-moving startups, and constant disruption, how might we need to adapt them? Do their core principles still hold true? That is the kind of critical thinking that separates a good analyst from a great one. Keep pushing. You're doing fantastic work.